what we're talking about today is some of the lesser known ADHD terms and also kind of niche terms as well that you've maybe never heard of that can be really validating about how our brains work and what that looks like. Some of these you may have heard of them, some of them you may not. So the first one that I want to talk to you about is called monotropism. Has anybody heard of that monotropism before? I hadn't heard of it until recently. So monotropism is when basically having very, very like narrow interests. So, and then also it can be looked at as having one or two channels of attention open at a time. So instead of like a bunch of stuff running at once, it's kind of related to our hyper focus. Monotropism can be a way of our thinking patterns where we're only able to focus on one thing at a time at a high level. Monotropism can also be related to being on the spectrum or just neurodiversity in general, where you have a few narrow interests there, and I'm on the spectrum. I have that where you just have a few narrow interests and you don't get tired of them. Mine was soccer growing up. That's all I wanted to do. That's all I cared about. Every gift that I got, I wanted to have a soccer ball. And nobody knew I was like on the spectrum as well, because ADHD can hide autism. So there are a lot of late diagnosed adults that have what's called ADHD. So you have the ADHD part where you like change and novelty and newness, and then you have the autism part, which wants sameness, routine, familiarity, and they can almost like hide each other. Because it's when something is more extreme or more prevalent or sticks out, it's easier to get diagnosed, right? So you might not be constantly seeking new stuff and constantly hyperactive. You might be very focused, which is what I was on soccer. So I'd like take all that energy from the ADHD and just go play soccer. And I played semi-pro in college and it worked out. It was great. And then I moved it to real estate and here we are, right? Here we are. So monotropism is having more narrow interests. Um, and instead of like broad stuff. Now, with ADHD, we can also hop. So, how that can look like is if you have your beeline on an interest, let's say you get into crafts, right? Does anybody, that's a thing, like anybody crafts or like making stuff or hobbies or things like that. Could be a hobby, it could be a sport. So, you get super into it and then it just loses the dopamine, and then you're not into it anymore. And you're like, oh my gosh, I spent all this money on craft supplies, or I bought all this gear to play this sport, or I got into like writing, or I got journaling, and we get all of this momentum, and then we can get tired of it. So monotropism doesn't necessarily say you're obsessed with one thing forever. It can be very, very focused, and then that shifts, but it's more so focused on one thing at a time. So the next term and some of these might apply to you and some of them may not. What I've found is that naming these for some people can be a light bulb moment. So if you experience this, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm not crazy. All of this makes sense. And so this next one is what's called misophonia. And this is a term, if you experience this, can be extremely validating. So misophonia is actually a different wiring in the brain, and it's way more common with neurodivergent people. And it is basically translates to the hatred of certain sounds. So there could be certain sounds that just trigger a fight or flight response in your brain. So it could be chewing, it could be tapping, somebody sniffling, somebody coughing. It could be like just certain sounds of people shuffling on the floor with their shoes. It could be clinking of silverware against somebody's teeth. It's more normally more on average related to eating sounds or mouth noises, but it can be any kind of noise, and it's not all noise, it's specific noises. And what they've shown is that it actually can trigger a fight or flight response in the brain. If you have misophonia, it's actually a different wiring system, and it's way more common with neurodivergent people. So, is anybody here who has like, let's say there's like a lunch and learn, but it's really hard to pay attention because somebody's chewing next to you, or somebody's maybe chewing gum, or there's noises, and it's not just annoying, like it can really literally trigger rage. It can trigger like fight or flight. You could freeze, you could dissociate, you could get almost like rageful. Like, how are they chewing so loud? Why is that happening? It is legitimately a thing, and you're not crazy. I have it, and I found out about it a long time ago before I even knew as much about neurodivergence, and was like, oh my gosh. And so there are times when I have to put in earplugs, but the main thing with misophonia is to recognize that it's the first thing you do before you have the term for it is you just think the other person's chewing really loud, or they're or like you start to get a rage, or there's a story in your head. And when you recognize what it is, there's a couple options, right? So one, it could say, okay, they're being a normal person and they're eating while we're watching this show. That's not necessarily them being ridiculous or disrespectful, and that can calm down some of the story in our head. And at the same time, I have this reaction in my brain, and that's not wrong either. So what can I do? Whether it's I wear noise canceling headphones, if it's somebody that cares about me and I care about them and we have a relationship, I might ask them if they can close their mouth in a very nice, respectful way. Or I just might remove myself, or I just might say, hey, would you mind, like, if we don't eat dinner and watch the show, could we watch the show after, right? So there's things you can do, but when you have a name for it, it's really helpful, and you can actually Google it and look it up and get support versus just thinking something's wrong with me or something's wrong with them or starting to dissociate, right? So misophonia is absolutely a thing, and it is a different like neurological wiring in your brain that can create a fight or flight response. So that's misophonia. The next one is kind of interesting. Emotional object impermanence. Object impermanence for us is if it's not in front of us, it doesn't exist, right? We can forget about it. So that's why if your partner says, hey, can you take out the trash? Remember, in our brains, we see time as now or not now, right? So if they're like, hey, could you take out the trash by the end of this weekend? And we say, yeah, absolutely. And we mean that. But then we don't see the trash and we completely forget about it. It just like doesn't exist unless it's in our face, you know? Or what can happen too is like if you don't, if that's why we leave the house without certain things that we need because it just doesn't exist anymore, right? Or we forget it exists. So object impermanence is that thing. If it's not in front of us, sometimes it doesn't exist. It's not in the ecosphere. That can actually fall over into finances. Because if we're not looking at our finances, or if we're not looking at our bank account, or we're not tracking stuff, we can have magical thinking. We don't understand where things went. Like our brain's not keeping track of it as a neurotypical brain might. So we need to use external sources. So object impermanence is if the thing is not in front of us, it doesn't exist. So here's the term I want to talk about to take it to a next level. And this is the one that a lot of people don't know about. It's called emotional object impermanence. Emotional object impermanence. So this can be twofold. So one, we can forget about people we care about. And it's not that we don't care. It's like our brain just doesn't put it front of mind, right? So you might have family members and you haven't talked to them in 6 months, but you love them deeply and you care about them a lot, but it's just literally your brain's not bringing it to front of mind. It's really interesting. Or friends. Sometimes we can have more trouble keeping up with friends or maintaining friendships because we have a difficult time remembering that, or remembering to text them, or that they exist. And it's not that we don't care. It's not that we're cold. Our brain just has so much going on. It doesn't put it front of mind. So this can also happen the reverse way, where we might struggle to feel like somebody cares if they're not actively present in front of us or in touch with us, even though we know logically they do. So this can happen in relationships, friendships, with family. It's like, and we could maybe have more anxious attachment, and that can add a layer on top of that. That if they're not in front of us, our brain doesn't think that they care or they exist. It's called emotional object impermanence. Somebody put that in the comments. So object impermanence, and then emotional object impermanence. And so relationships sometimes can feel harder, or we can doubt that people care, even though they told us yesterday they do, but this time they didn't call us. And if it's not in front of us, it's like it doesn't exist. So it's interesting. Sometimes when people go on vacation, it can create anxiety because it's like our house doesn't exist. We don't have that anymore. Depending on the severity of your object impermanence, it's like harder for us to anchor and just think we're on vacation. It's like, well, this is my life now. If anybody's experienced that, like this is where I live now. This is, and so then it can have a lot of layers. So it just depends on the severity of that in your brain. But having a name for that, if you do experience that, can be very validating for people. And then now there's stuff that you can do about it, right? So yeah, so that's object impermanence or emotional object impermanence. The next term is called demand avoidance. Demand avoidance. So this is resistance to demands. So it's not even about the task itself sometimes. It's that if there's a demand, sometimes even we put on ourselves, we can shut down. It can cause anxiety. We can want to do the opposite. If you're on the spectrum, you can have this, but turned up, right? Pathological demand avoidance. So it's a little bit more extreme. But demand avoidance is resistance to demands, and they are still looking at whether this is um, environmental, because as a person with ADHD, we need to manually regulate our nervous systems a lot more than someone who doesn't have ADHD. And it might be a trauma response from feeling stuck or having to sit still or being in uncomfortable sensory experiences for extended period of times. So it's one theory is that it's a response to um, almost like a trauma response, like a little, there's big T and there's little t, right? Like big trauma, a really significant event. There's little t, which is like little trauma, which is still trauma, but it's not being in a really big car accident, right? Or coming back from war. We have little t. So we can experience little t as a neurodivergent person when we are not able to regulate, when we are in situations that are extremely uncomfortable for our nervous system to the point we might need to dissociate. And so demand avoidance, one theory is that it's coming from little t or little trauma. And then there's also evidence of showing it's in our brain mapping as well, especially the pathological demand avoidance, how strong that is in kids with autism who maybe haven't had the restriction and are still experiencing that. So I think, there's more and more studies coming out about neurodivergence, autism, ADHD, and there's more and more of overlap between the two versus these being these totally separate things. So they're finding a lot more about both of those. So anyways, that's the current research. But demand avoidance is resistance to demand. And as a real estate agent and an entrepreneur, right, we can have a lot of demands. So what are some demands that can come up in your day as a real estate agent or an entrepreneur? What can feel like demand? And these can be self-imposed or client imposed. We get text messages all the time, right? Our phones, like people can have instant communication with us at all the time. So some things that can feel like demands is you got to go into the office. Yeah, asking for calls, calling people back can be a demand. I think a lot of us don't realize how many things are a demand in our brain. Yeah, having to lead gen 3 hours a day. Think of demands as like structure for some of us. Like you have to. Phone calls, text, emails. We are constantly getting a slew of demands, a slew of demands. And then to run a successful business, a lot of times we need to use our time efficiently. And so a lot of people turn to time blocking, and that can feel like a demand. So yeah, and then just calling people back constantly. So think of demands as like things that we need to do to run our business that other people are asking us to do. So a lot of times we don't realize. And so that's why having a break is really important for us, not just because you should take a break, but because we need a demand break because we're constantly getting inundated with people with things that people want. And then they should, like, that's our job, right? But we need to consciously take a break from demands because you can also get like demand fatigue, right? If you're constantly having to lead gen and then everybody's calling you back and you've got to fill out forms and then you've got to go to this appointment and you've got to do an open house and then this person wants something and then this lender wants something and this other agent wants something. And we want to send out cards and we want to answer all our emails before the day ends and we want to call everybody back. It's just constant demands. And so when you have demand avoidance, that can cause burnout. So besides just saying, I'm going to go on a sabbatical, right? Having a 24-hour window where you don't take demands or you limit those can be really, really good for your brain. And this is what I always recommend. You want a full day of a break. And if you can't take a Saturday or Sunday or a Tuesday or a Monday off once a week, you could do a Tuesday afternoon to Sunday afternoon where people won't miss you as much. right? And set that expectation and give that to yourself, or a Sunday afternoon to Monday at lunchtime. But just a break from demands where you put your phone on silent or you forward it to a different phone, or you just check, but it's not all the time, can be really good for our brain. Just the other thing for demand avoidance, because I feel like this is a huge thing, is reminding ourselves that it's a choice. You don't have to call them back. You don't have to. You don't have to be in real estate. You don't have to lead gen. You don't have to go to an open house. You don't have to do anything. You are choosing to do that. But nobody's going to come and arrest you if you don't do that. You're choosing to do that and not get another job because that's what you want to do. So just reminding ourselves about choice can be really helpful too, that we are choosing to do it. We don't have to, but we choose to. There can be a lot of demand. So giving yourself a demand break and then reminding yourself of choice. So you could do that. This is another one I haven't talked about before. It's called allostatic load. Allostatic load. So this is the cumulative wear that chronic stress can leave on our body, even low-grade stress, right, which can happen as a real estate agent, that doesn't really fully reset without a big break or a big vacation. So has anybody thought like, hey, nothing bad has happened today. Like, why am I depleted? Like, why am I tired? Why am I burned out? There's nothing happening. Has anybody felt that before? So that's a common thing. Like, I shouldn't be tired. Why am I tired? And so maybe you don't have the business, or maybe it's been a low week, but the allostatic load, and everybody experiences this. It can be at a higher level with neurodivergence. But I feel like that's really validating because we can shame ourselves. Like, why am I tired? Why am I burned out? Like, nothing happened, or nothing's happening right now. But just that chronic low level stress where we can still feel fatigued can happen. And so we want to address that to be able to calm that down versus just beat ourselves out and trying to push more. Right. So allostatic load is the chronic low level stress that can happen if you're not taking time off, if you're not taking breaks, if you're not having boundaries with your work or your clients, especially if your numbers aren't where you want to be. We're more likely to forgo some of these boundaries, which actually works against you. It's really interesting. But if I were behind goal, and I know some people are, I would want to first block in the breaks. I know that I need to be myself. How much sleep do I need? How much rest time? How much time for like just fun or taking a break or demand break to operate at my best? And then block that. And then the time left, I'm going hard, right? Like when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm having fun with family, like I'm with family. And that's going to give you a release valve of that allostatic load, right? To recharge. Because I think a lot of us like don't take breaks, don't take vacations. That's pretty common. I've been a coach now for 8 years, so I know a lot of us. We just kind of go for quantity instead of quality sometimes. And sometimes that's our culture, what we learn. But just again, the importance of taking breaks and coming from a place of abundance can actually increase your business. Um, so here's another one. Interoception. Interoception. This is another term. Interoception. So this is our sense of what's happening inside our own body, whether we're hungry, tired, overwhelmed, we're hot, we're cold. So for a lot of us, that is weaker in neurodivergent brains. Interoception, we have a weaker connection with that. So we're less likely to, and tell me if you can relate to this, know that we've taken on too much, that we're overwhelmed until it's too late. Until it's too late or until we're burned out, we're less likely to do that. Heat. I totally experienced this. I was driving cross country last year before, on a speaking tour for ADHD, and I was in the desert. I was in like near Las Vegas, and it was like this crazy heat wave. And my interoception is really poor, and I didn't realize how hot I was, and the engine was overheating. So I turned on the heat to pull the heat from the engine while I was driving this like 110, 115 degree weather trying to get to a gas station so the engine didn't go out. Well, I was like getting heat exhaustion, pretty bad, like pretty disoriented, but I didn't notice until it was really, really bad. That was really scary. And I just didn't pick up on that. It was too hot. And I think some of that goes back to our monotropism, right? Where we can get so hyper focused on, I got to get to the next gas station or I got to pull the heat out of the engine. I didn't realize what was happening. And that was really scary. And so it was just a wake up call. But you might not recognize you're thirsty. Anybody gone all day or till lunch or till evening without eating? Forget to eat a snack, right? You get hyper focused. So that can be it as well. And we can stay in situations where, and again, it can be this benefit because we can hang a lot longer. Does anybody grew up playing a sport? Is anybody into sports or playing a sport or have a kid that plays a sport or a friend, sibling, right? We have a lot of, so sports. There are so many really high level athletes that have ADHD. Michael Jordan, um, best basketball player ever, had ADHD. So there is a benefit, right? There is a benefit to all of these things because we can go harder. I played, like I said, I played college D1 and semi-pro soccer, and I played D1 track. I was a dual sport college athlete. But we just don't pick up on the cues. So we can actually push ourselves harder in training, and therefore our endurance is higher. And so it could be this huge benefit to have weaker interoception levels. It really can. We can go all day as a real estate agent. Oh my gosh, I got to eat. So it's just what is the threshold where it starts to harm us and it's like really not healthy? That's what we want to watch out for. So that's interoception. Next one, some of you have probably heard me talk about this, is rejection sensitivity dysphoria or RSD. So that is really like a fear of rejection on steroids, right? We can take even something neutral and assume negative from that. And it actually creates emotional pain, like lighting up in our brain. So they actually studied that where again, it's like a different wiring in our brain that emotional pain centers can light up if we perceive rejection. And so if you have a hard time calling or doing lead gen, it's not that just you have a fear of rejection, get over it. It's that you might actually get very dysregulated or like really get your feelings hurt, even at perceived rejection. And so we want to be able to self-soothe instead of just, oh, build your tolerance, suck it up. It's like, wow, like what do I want to do? What story do I want to shift in my head? How do I want to address this? And to like, and that oftentimes is an approach. Or maybe what's a type of lead generation that doesn't trigger that rejection? Maybe, and I've had this before, maybe it's like the sound of someone's voice rejecting me as a trigger for me. But if it's an email or text, it doesn't affect me, or maybe in person is really helpful, but over the phone, I can't see their facial expression. I can't even picture them. That's too much. So if you have a really strong reaction to rejection, you can totally be successful, but you want to find a type of lead generation that doesn't trigger that. After you get lead generating in a type that doesn't trigger that, then you can start to expand and get outside your comfort zone. But what I don't want you to do is stay in this perpetual frozen state of not wanting to get rejected, and you just want to suck it up and do regular lead gen on the phone or whatever, but you're just stuck, right? It's like too big of a jump that you can't do it and you stay frozen. So if you haven't done lead gen for a long time, maybe try to find something that feels less like lead gen where you're still talking to people, or do care calls, or just do something. Do something, right? Because something is way better than nothing. And keep playing with stuff that doesn't trigger that. But yeah, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, that is a real thing. Dr. Ned Hollowell, leading psychologist on this, estimates that 75 to 100% of people with ADHD have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And so just be aware of that. And you're not crazy and you're not too sensitive, and you don't need to just suck it up. Like there's a real connection in there that creates emotional pain. And so knowing that can be really helpful. The next one is called alexithymia. So alexithymia. So this is an interesting one too, and definitely if you're on the spectrum, you may experience this, and if you're just ADHD and that's it, you may experience it. So alexithymia, this is a difficulty naming what you're feeling in the moment, even when something's happening. It's sometimes hard time identifying what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, even if there's no logic, or it could be delayed process. So if you ever had this where you had an interaction that maybe you didn't get treated well, or it was really emotional or really big, and you just were kind of numb or didn't know, and then you processed it later, and then you felt the feelings that came with it, and it might take a week, it might take 2 weeks, or maybe you just have trouble identifying how you're feeling. You just know you don't feel good, or you feel dysregulated, or sometimes you can be happy or excited, but you can't identify that, so it just feels like distress or dysregulation, and it could be something good. So alexithymia, and again, we have a different wiring system, is sometimes, difficulty identifying what your feelings are, expressing your feelings, naming it, especially when it's happening. And there could be a delayed reaction to that we experience later. So that's another one. There's something called RRE. It's called recognition responsive euphoria. So this is another one, a recognition responsive euphoria. So on the flip side of rejection sensitive dysphoria, genuine praise sometimes doesn't feel just nice. It like floods us. It helps us feel truly seen and can make us be almost like high for days. So it's like the other form. And remember, our brain can sometimes be a form of extremes. Like it can kind of be extreme. Like we're totally on and hyper focused, or we're totally bored and we're like not even activated, right? Or we can feel completely rejected, or we can feel on top of the world, and a compliment can mean everything for us, or it can be really hard for us to take. So that's an interesting newer term, recognition responsive euphoria. RRE. And again, that has to do with our dopamine receptors. And then also, it's like the flip side of the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Another one is called temporal discounting. So future rewards feel dramatically less motivating than immediate rewards. I'll feel better if I finish this tomorrow. Might not have any motivational power compared with I want to do something interesting right now. Like that sounds really fun. So it's and that can kind of pair with the time blindness or trouble gauging time or the object impermanence. So again, if I do this, I'll feel so good tomorrow. It's like we see time as now or not now. So here's the thing that will feel better, but it's not now. So it's kind of never. So temporal discounting is something that can happen as well. Another one is called activation energy. So this is a disproportionately large amount of mental effort that's required to transition from thinking about doing something to actually doing it. So to like, because we've had that, I want to do this. If you had that, I wanted this, it's motivated, I really want to do this, but then to doing the action is a lot harder. And they've shown that our brain, interestingly, again with dopamine, can release a lot of the dopamine while we're thinking about it, whereas neurotypical people don't get the dopamine until they start doing it. So our reward system is a little bit different. So we can get a lot of dopamine from thinking about something. So for example, have you ever had an idea or something or marketing or something that was like really, really exciting, and you thought about it and gave you all this dopamine to the point you almost got like overwhelmed, or it was like too much and then you didn't do it? It was like, oh, that's a lot, So we can have this huge flood of dopamine instead of it being like do like trickled out, where it's actually too much and it overwhelms us. It's really, really interesting when we get into the neuroscience. But again, there's a benefit to all this stuff, right? So you are where you are because of how your brain is wired, and you probably don't have to work as hard as a neurotypical person. So remember, we've studied this, but your conversion rates are probably double that of a person without ADHD. So they're double, right? The average agent takes 120 two-way conversations for one closing. You as an ADHD agent are going to take about 60. So you're going to do half the lead gen for the same amount of work. So I also want to remind you that, but if you're beating yourself up for not being as productive, or you can't do what somebody else does, you only have to do 50% of what they do. Seriously. And you're going to do the same. I'm not kidding. So just take a deep breath, and I hope that helps you regulate. And right, if you do the same thing they do, you're going to do double the amount of visits they do. And that's statistics that we've studied over like 7 to 8 years. So these are some niche terms for ADHD that I felt like were really important. So anyways, thank you for being on today. Those are the terms, and we'll be on next Tuesday with some more education for you. So thanks for being here. Let me know if you need anything. And yeah, have a great rest of your week with your cool ADHD brain.